Hi, and welcome to the fourth episode in my Video Games and Geography series. The general concept of the consumption of media facilitating tourism to certain places in the world is not a new concept and has received much attention by media scholars. As Dubois and Gibbs describe it, media tourism is a broad term related to the visits or travel to places associated with media, such as books, movies, and TV series. Popular examples include Lord of the Rings fans traveling to New Zealand or Harry Potter fans to Oxford. These examples show that media do not exist only as secluded digital landscapes, but have tangible placemaking effects in the real world through their consumers. In this episode, I'm going to argue that just as film and TV series can have these effects, video games can too. Now, unfortunately, while media tourism is a broad, all-encompassing term, it has been severely limited to just film and TV series. This is unfortunate in my opinion because video games as a medium can have just as much cultural value as films and series. I would even go one step further and say that video games possess a certain quality that the aforementioned media do not, which is interactivity. I argue that engagement with video games entail a more intimate experience than films or series do, and thus they forge stronger emotional connections. While a single movie is often no longer than 2 hours, many video games take 10 times that to complete. My last playthrough of The Witcher 3, for example, took me over 150 hours to complete. In this sense, video game consumption requires a deeper commitment than other forms of media and forges more memorable experiences. I also argued that this interactivity of video games makes the video game player share similarities with the tourist in regards to their spatial navigation. Let's take Sleeping Dogs as an example. In Sleeping Dogs, you play as an undercover detective infiltrating a crime network. The game takes place in Hong Kong, but it's not a perfect recreation of the actual city. The game only includes Hong Kong Island, but only 4 of its districts: North Point, Central, Kennedy Town, and Aberdeen. Notable landmarks such as Hong Kong International Airport and Hong Kong Disneyland are missing. You could then argue that experiencing such a city does not foster relations to its real-world counterpart, but I beg to differ, for a few reasons. First, while video games have a long way, they still do, and most likely always will, suffer from technological limitations. Perfect recreation of a city in the game that is also functional and fun to play is simply impossible, but I think the developers still did a good job at it despite the limitations. Secondly, as we have seen in the example of Lara Croft in the previous episode, video game landscapes only exist to serve the narrative. In other words, locations that have no relevance to the story have no place in the game. It would be somewhat strange to include Disneyland Hong Kong in the game that includes violent gang beatdowns. Would probably lead to some legal issues for the developers even. Finally, well, this may be a bit of an assumption on my part, but I would argue that an interactive experience of a fragmented city is a more intimate experience than a perfectly recreated but passive experience. In Sleeping Dogs, for example, the player spends countless hours taking in the city, driving around, and generally taking in the sights. If the game is designed well, the game world and the location it's set in will leave a lasting impression on the player, because each player is creating their own individual experiences by interacting with the virtual world. I will elaborate this last point with another example. While particular case studies on video game tourism are hard to find, I did find 2 examples I would like to highlight. In the first study, Louis-Étienne Dubois and Chris Gibbs analyzed how playing Assassin's Creed 2 affects the experience of visiting the Italian city of Florence. On screen there are some clips from a Assassin's Creed fan, who has uploaded to YouTube a comparison of the locations in the game as compared to the locations in the actual city that he has visited. In Assassin's Creed 2 you play as Ezio Auditore, an assassin in 15th century Florence, in which the player gets to explore a beautiful medieval rendition of Florence, compete with landmarks that still exist today. In their article, Dubois and Gibbs gather posts from online forums and travel review websites, where some tourists elaborate on how their experience of playing Assassin's Creed 2 impacted their visit of the city of Florence. In these reports, Dubois and Gibbs found clear evidence of how games can facilitate the on-site experience. The tourists in the report recognized landmarks in the city and reminisced about their experience playing the game. in which they, through the body of Ezio, climb those very landmarks that they are now seeing in front of them in real life. One mother even reported being amazed by their son's spatial knowledge of the city, simply because they had played Assassin's Creed 2. While most Assassin's Creed players that do go on holiday do not specifically choose Florence because of their experience with the game, but when they do visit, there's a clear connection between their memories of playing the game. Their experience of running around the city as Ezio then translates into them in their real bodies visiting and walking around the city of Florence. The second example is a case study by Alexandra Jaworovich Zimny, in which she investigates how the Witcher 3 Wild Hunt inspired tourism in Poland. So in The Witcher 3, the player takes on the monster-slaying role of Geralt of Rivia. The developers of the game are Polish, and while the game is set in a fantasy setting, there are clear inspirations from Polish folklore and the physical landscape of Poland. Due to its massive popularity, the franchise brings many tourists to Poland through the event of the Witcher School. The Witcher School is a 3-day event in which fans roleplay as characters from the franchise and attend workshops on activities such as fencing, archery, meditations, and alchemy. The author of the article concluded from interviewing attendees that experiencing the virtual landscape of The Witcher 3 fostered real-world connections to Poland. Players recognized the natural landscape and the city architecture from the games that they had found themselves immersed in, leading to a deeper emotional connection to their travel destination during their visit. Concretely, this had the effect of fans deciding to spend more time in Poland. Their experience with the games aroused a deeper interest in the country. In my opinion, this is an argument as to why it's not necessary for games to be a perfect one-to-one representation of the location they're based on. The immersive experience and interactive nature of playing a game make up for any inaccuracies or limitations imposed by technological limits. While research on video game tourism is still very scarce, I would argue that these two aforementioned case studies already show ample proof that media scholars need to include video games more seriously in their research on media tourism. The case studies showed that the experience of a game based on a real setting fosters real-world connections when physically visiting that location, and changes the experience of the tourist. This also leads to real tangible consequences, such as in the case of the Witcher fans deciding to extend their stay in Poland, simply because of their connection to the Witcher franchise. For me, this makes it all the more confusing as to why video game tourism is so underrepresented, as it is not only interesting for academia from a social sciences perspective, but could also lead to an increase in profits for tourist agencies. And with that, we come to the end of the 4th episode. On the next episode, we will do a meta-analysis of game studies. In particular, while doing this project, I noticed that video game scholars have a certain obsession with one game in particular, that being Red Dead Redemption 2. We will investigate what makes this game so overrepresented in research and what conclusions game researchers are drawing by analyzing Red Dead Redemption 2. See you on the next one.